Okay, in 3 seconds.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Assalatu wassalamu anbiya wal mursalin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad Fatih lima khuliq wal khatim lima sabaq. Nasrul haq bi haq wa hadi ila siratal mustaqim wa ala alihi daril azim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh everyone. May peace be upon you wherever you are with your family. We pray for you to be in good health, well-being, and good iman in these pandemic times. May Allah ease us and suffice our need. Alhamdulillah, welcome to another night on Sunday night with Shaykh Aziz at Sud Ilahi online class. And today, Shaykh Aziz will continue the same book, but a different chapter from the 40 principles of the Deen from Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam Ghazali. But tonight he will touch on anger, which is an interesting subject which many of us have to deal with it. So inshallah we will learn a lot tonight from with Shaykh Aziz. So before we go into it, let's us get to know more about the Shaykh, especially for those who are watching this for the first time. Shaykh Aziz Ahmad Fredericks was born in Nottingham in the United Kingdom, where he completed his schooling before moving to Leicester for university studies. He completed a BD education specializing in language arts. He then went on to carry out postgraduate studies in education in various universities, including London University Institute of Education, Starlight University, and the Open University. He also did research at the School of Oriental and African Studies. He has published a number of articles on education and design the curriculum of Islamia School London at the time it achieved voluntary aided status. The curriculum was published by the Islamia School Trust. He edited many books on Islam, including several under the direct supervision of his teacher Fatullah Gulen. He has worked as a teacher, head teacher, and school principal in England, Scotland, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and USA. As educational consultant, he has worked on projects in Turkey, Yemen, Kenya, Jordan, and South Africa. He has a special interest in special education needs and additional support and currently works full-time as additional support manager for a local education authority. He has worked as a policy advisor for several education authorities and schools, including the UK Madrasa Network. His Islamic studies took him to various parts of the world, where he studied under many prominent traditional scholars. One of them is his beloved teacher, Habib Ahmad Mashur Al-Haddad, under whom he studied in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, and Sheikh Abdul Rahman Kitami in Kenya. He translated The Essential of Islam, Risalah to Jamia, by Habib Ahmad bin Zain Al-Habshi, and 40 Hadith on the Quran by Mullah Ali Al-Qari, and currently he also had published and completed the translation of Nasiha Ad-Dunya of Habib Abdul Haddad, and also the famous book that many of us always finding interesting to learn from him, Riyada to Sibian, The Educating Children by Imam Al-Ramli. Shaykh Abdul Aziz uses his teaching experience and a variety of modern teaching methods and interactive style. He has taught various books around the world, including the Book of Assistance of Habib Abdullah Haddad and the 40 Hadiths of Imam Nawawi. His interest in special educational needs drove him to co-found the organization called Islamic Text for the Blind, Kitaba. The Islamic Text for the Blind produces books in Braille and audio format, provides accessible online classes, and has accessible website with Islamic resources translation. They work with government and voluntary organizations to meet the religious and cultural needs of disabled Muslims. Sheikh Aziz authored the book Living with Blindness, which was used to launch a number of conferences on the marginalized in society, addressing issues of disability and access to mosques, institutions, and Islamic teachings. He is an active campaigner for free and open access to Islamic teaching for all. And Sheikh Aziz is residing in Glasgow, Scotland. May Allah preserve him. Before I hand over to Sheikh, please take note that you can send your question to 90687 106. If you are overseas, not in Singapore, then you should add +65 90687 106. Without further ado, I welcome Sheikh Aziz Tafadhal Sheikh to start the class.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. So alhamdulillah, this is the third class that we have on the book which Khalid just mentioned, which is Al-Arba'in fil Usul, the 40 principles, which, as we mentioned in the previous weeks, is a summary, an abridgment of the 40 books of the Ihya al-Ulumuddin, bringing to life the sciences of the religion. And it's divided into 4 parts, and we took the first part is on worship, and we discussed that or studied that last week, or part of it, on fasting. And in that, we mentioned a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about fasting, that when you are fasting and somebody comes to argue or fight with you, you should say, inni sa'im, inni sa'im. It's very important that the hadith actually mentions it twice. And the wisdom behind him, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam recommending that you say it twice, is the first time you say it to yourself. So you address yourself, inni sa'im, I am holding back. And then you say to the person that's arguing with you, inni sa'im, I am holding back, I'm fasting. And that's interesting because it implies that to understand and to control the anger during Ramadan is part of the process of the fast. And I mentioned that the whole second section of the book refers to the things that can damage you. And this section includes a section on anger. And I was more than happy to take any section from this beautiful book and discuss it. And it seemed that anger was one of the things that had come up in the questions, and I'm quite happy to address that. In terms of dealing with any quality, either good or bad, in terms of what we call the tarbiyah or your development, there are 3 parts to the process. There's a process to developing good qualities, and there's a process to develop to removing or dealing with those negative qualities within you. And these go back to the likes before Imam al-Ghazali, for the likes of Abu Talib al-Makki, for example, who clearly describes how this process takes place. And it has 3 parts to it. The first is what he calls ilm, knowledge. And the second is amal, action. And the third is hal, state. So let's just go over those. First of all, you need to know something. For example, you need to know things about, for example, you need to know that you are very, very fortunate. Somebody sent a message to me the other day, yesterday. How are you doing under these isolation situations? He says, alhamdulillah, we have everything that we wish for. We're together. We have more than we're blessed with. That's actually knowledge. To know that is something that you have to understand intellectually, that we're blessed. And then it leads to action. So if you know something, then it leads to action. And the message that began with, alhamdulillah, all praises to Allah. So knowledge of how lucky we are leads to action, which in this case is to say, alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah, or thanks be to Allah. And likewise, another action that follows from that knowledge is that not everybody else is as lucky as we are. Therefore, some of the things that we have, I'm going to give to other people in to share these blessings. And that's what we call sadaqah, or charity. So here, the section that leads from that knowledge that we have been given, that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has granted us blessings, now leads us to at least two actions that I've just mentioned, showing gratitude by these words, and showing gratitude by giving in charity. And then as a result of this action, you have a state, which is to be grateful. And this internalized state becomes something that you feel when you give charity, when you say Alhamdulillah. So the result of your action is this state. And eventually that state, when it becomes permanent, it becomes what in Arabic we call a maqam, a station. So you become grateful as a person. So the process of any good quality or removal of any bad quality goes through these stages. First knowledge, action, and then state. So ilm, amal, hal. And that's true of what we're about to address, which is the question of anger. So the first thing we need to know about anger. And just knowing about anger isn't sufficient. It must then lead you into certain actions. And once you get used to doing those actions, and you start to live those actions on a regular basis, it becomes your hal. You become less angry. You become clement, halim. You become patient. And that once that becomes your quality within you, then you become a patient person, which is the station of patience, the maqam of hilm, of becoming a clement person. So that's what this chapter is about. And I'm hoping that perhaps I'm going to cover the whole chapter in this one lesson. And if I do that, then it will probably be quite quick. And if people feel that we should go back to it, there's a lot more that can be added to it. Or we could move on to another similar chapter, perhaps on patience, perhaps on clemency, perhaps on being satisfied and content. All of these are very relevant. So let me take us through that again. Ilm, knowledge, amal, action, and hal, state. So the chapter is constructed in the way, the first thing it does, it tells us what is anger. It explains what anger is, and it puts it in this particular book, uses the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith about anger, for us to get a knowledge-based understanding of what anger is. And then it leads us into amal, action. And those actions, it talks about three particular strategies, which come from the Sunnah, from the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And here I'm going to divert slightly, because I will be drawing on personal experience and trying to relate that to the text. But obviously, whenever I say something which is not directly from the text, then you feel free to reject it if you wish, because this is my opinion. And I'll make it clear that this is my opinion and this is my experience. And you're free to accept or reject it, especially if it's not in tune with the text. And if it isn't, I'd also like to be advised that actually you've contradicted the text. But I don't think it will be. And maybe I'll just labor that point one for a second. When it comes to, there's one particular hadith, for example, al-ghadab min ash-shaytan wa shaytan min an-nar wal ma' yutfi an-nar. The anger comes from the devil, from shaitan, from Satan, was shaitan min an-nar, and Satan, shaitan, the devil, was created from fire, is from fire. Wal ma' yutfi an-nar, and water puts out fire. So here, this hadith talks about, and it relates to one of the strategies, which is to make ablution, to make wudu, when you get to a state of real anger, when the anger overwhelms you. Now, some of the scholars, in particular those who have an inclination towards medicine, go into quite a lot of detail about this hadith of why water affects the body, how it affects the heart, how it affects the temperature, how it affects different things. And they go into lots of discussion about what the strategy of making wudu implies in practical medical terms. Actually, pseudo-medicine is not, it's not based on the scientific understanding of medicine in the way that we understand it, although there are others. However, in my case, I also accept this hadith, but I understand that the strategy that's implied in the book that we're going to be reading of taking a particular posture, for example, might also include things like breathing. And I'm a firm believer from personal experience about breathing. And maybe I should just elaborate on what I mean by my personal experience. Alhamdulillah, as Khalid had mentioned, I have a lot of experience in teaching. I've been teaching for over 30 years, of all ages, but for a lot of those years have been with children who have difficulties of different types. And probably one of the most intense periods of my teaching career was with in a school where the children that were sent there were kids that just couldn't cope with education in the normal mainstream setting. They were violent. They were usually permanently excluded or regularly excluded from one school to the next, because in essence they had great anger issues and trauma issues, and violence was just the consequence of things that were going on in their lives. And I had to spend a bit of time trying to manage this school, and obviously to manage some of these very, very disturbed young people. And a lot of the strategies that I used were based around very simple things. Like I used to just hold the kids' hands, which is something also which is consistent with the Prophet ﷺ, to hold their hands and just tell them to breathe. And often I said, breathe. Don't talk to me, breathe. And when their breathing calms down, then they would start to talk. So the prerequisite for them explaining why they're angry was to do this. Now, these are strategies that I know work, and they don't contradict the strategies that are described in this book. But I believe that some of the strategies that I mentioned in the book are just indicators to further strategies. And hopefully, when we come to amal, action, based on the knowledge, I'm hoping that each one of us will work out strategies which work for them. And I might be referring to some of those strategies over and over again. And I just want to put that kind of proviso in, that some of those things come from my personal experience rather than from the text. And I think they're going to be pretty clear. And then hopefully that the last paragraph or two of the chapter, talk about the hal, the state of clemency. What clemency means, al-hilm in Arabic. What hilm means is where you have the ability to become angry, you have the ability to inflict from your anger retribution for whatever made you angry, but you hold back from that. And I'll give you an example again from my personal experience. Again, reflecting on what I'd experienced, was that a lot of these kids would become very, very violent. And one of the children, I'd built up a good relationship with him before he'd come to the school. He was in a children's home, abandoned by his parents. I started to build a relationship, and we got on really well. Then he came to the school, and I deliberately went to see him in the children's home to build this relationship, because I knew how disturbed he was. The first day that I saw him as a head teacher in the school, he looked at me, and he seemed okay at first, and then he did something which he knew was wrong. He went away. I came to him very calmly, asked him if he's okay. The first thing he did, he punched me in the face. Now, the reaction to that was to hold him, not to physically to restrain him in the traditional sense of which I could have done legally. It was a violent incident. What I did, I held him in such a way that he knew he couldn't do any more to hurt me, but at the same time he was secure, and it was rather more like a bear hug, so to speak, a hug. And from that point on, every time he became angry, he knew that I wouldn't hurt him, even though I'm bigger than him. He was a tiny little boy. And so what he learned from me, one of the things I hope he learned from me, was that hilm, or the ability to be angry and to hurt somebody, is not necessarily the best way forward. So here, the state of hilm is the outcome of being able to contain the anger. And the last part of the chapter talks about that's what we should be striving for, and what that might look like in your life, so to speak. So alhamdulillah, that's the structure of the chapter, and hopefully that's the structure of how today's lesson is going to go. So let me read a little bit. As I said, the first thing it does, it explains what what anger is. And apologies for those that don't know any Arabic. I'm going to jump sometimes from Arabic to English, and that's partly because I'm just a bit kind of crazy, and sometimes I think more easily in Arabic and other times in English. So let me start with what the Arabic text says. أصل الثالث في الغضب, the third principle that's been in this section, is about anger. واعلم أن الغضب شعلة من شعلة النار, that the anger is a flame that comes from the fire. اقتبست من نار الله الموقدة, and it's been kindled. It's been kindled from the fire of God. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the heaven and He's created the hell. And that hell, the fire of God, the fire of Jahannam, from that, the flame of that has been placed in humanity. So there's a anger is from the fire. And therefore, التي تطلع على الأفئدة. So what does this fire do? It rises up on the hearts and the minds of the human being. ومن غلب عليه, and whenever this overwhelms somebody, overcomes somebody, when this fire overwhelms them, غضب عليه فقد نزع إلى إرق الشيطان. And this I'm going to just jump to the translation. Whoever it overcomes has adopted the stock of Satan. Now, I'm not quite sure I'm happy with that word stock of Satan. It's a correct translation, but the word irq is actually the vein that you have in your body. What he's done, he's taken from the vein of the shaitan. The reason why he uses the word stock is because from the word vein or root or stem, which all irq is implied in that, you also get the hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Inna al-irq dasas," that the genes, so to speak, are transfer through the blood. That your offspring will have genetically things from you and from the mother and from the father. And in this sense, the irq, the vein, the blood, transfers. And the word irq here is described the irq of shaitan. So what he's understood the word stock is like it's like you're associating with the descendants of shaitan, that you're the stock in the sense of the translation is the offspring. So it's like you're connecting to the offspring of shaitan, or you have become the offspring of shaitan. Because indeed shaitan was created from the fire. So this thing that you're allowing to overwhelm you has become the thing that's flowing through your body is the thing that flows through shaitan, through the devil. Now, I'm tempted to talk about Batman here deliberately, because anybody that knows the last Batman film, I think it was The Dark Knight Rises, the beginning of that, he says fire rises. Fire rises, and that's the beginning of the story. And actually, it's taken from Charles Dickens, who in Tale of Two Cities talks about. There's a chapter called "The Fire Rising." Now, all of that imagery, and I deliberately use Batman and Charles Dickens because they're considered to be the good guys, and this idea of the fire rising has lots of implications for society. Because Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities is about society, and Batman is about good fighting evil. But the idea of fire rising is quite interesting because it's connected to shaitan, and how shaitan, what his feeling is that he wants to rise above. He wants to be better and above people. Why do we know this? Is because your humanity is connected to Adam, Sayyidina Adam. And your devilish nature, or being overpowered by the devil, is connected to Shaitan, who was the enemy of Adam. Now, how do we know he was the enemy of Adam? Because according to the Quran and the Sunnah, Iblis recognized, and according to some, he was in the garden and among the worshippers. And when Allah created Adam, because he was from the jinn who were created before humankind, when Allah created Adam, he wasn't, Allah commanded the angels and those of the Jannah too, usjudu li Adam, to make sajda, prostrate to Adam. And Iblis refused. Why? What did he refuse and how did he says, khalaqtani min narin wa khalaqtahu min teen. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. So why should I prostrate to him? And that's why Shaitan was rejected from the heaven. And as a result of his imminent rejection, he then waged war on Adam and his descendants, and that's me and you, by trying to draw them into his method, into his way. So what Shaitan, through anger, what he tries to do, he tries to pull you away from your humanity and drive you towards his inhumanity, towards his fire. And that's why fire rises, whereas teen, the word teen, clay, is to do with the earth. Now, one of the strategies we're going to come to is that when you become angry, you should sit down. Now, most people don't fully understand what that means. Most people think if you're standing up, you should sit down on a chair. It doesn't mean that. What it means is you should sit on the ground, ideally on the grass, on the earth outside. So you should leave the situation, sit down on the ground. Why should you sit down on the ground? Because Adam was created from the ground. Your origin is the ground, and that's where you're going to end up. We're all going to end up buried in the ground. So by connecting to the ground, by sitting on the floor, you're connecting to your natural state. Whereas when you're standing up and rising above, you're connecting to the fire. And as Batman says, as Charles Dickens says, fire rises. Fire rises. And the Quranic verse is related to that. Clearly that Shaitan wants to rise above Adam. He wants to be better. And that's what we know. When anger gets into your heart, the reason usually is because you think you're better than the person that you're angry with. Because if you were humble and you didn't feel that way, then it wouldn't have been a big deal. You would have just brushed it off. So here, you can associate with Shaitan, or you can associate with your humanity. You can associate with trying to rise above, or you can associate with reconnecting with the earth. And those people that understand what it means to just sit on the ground, to put your body on the floor, on the grass. There's nothing like lying or sitting on the grass for connecting you to nature, to your nature, as well as the nature around you. And if you understand that, then you've kind of got the whole of the first part of this chapter. So that's the first point, how he defines anger. And connected to that, perhaps there's a verse that, before going into the hadith that are related in this, he says, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ جَعَلَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ الْحَمِيَّةِ when it's placed in the hearts of the disbelievers, al-hamiyya. Al-hamiyya here is anger, but it comes from the verb hamiyya. Hamiyya means to burn or to flare up, and it's the word that's used when metal becomes red hot. Hamiyya means it becomes burning hot. It also means a fever, and this hamiyya, or hamiyya as it's mentioned, the form that's mentioned here, means zeal, fervor. It's kind of pushes, which is in some ways a good thing. You need fervor to do something. However, what does fervor and zeal come sometimes later? And that's why hamiyya is also used for violence. It's also used for temper. It's also used for chauvinism. And that's interesting because once you start to think you're better than somebody else, you become a chauvinist. You can become a male chauvinist, you can be an Arab chauvinist, you can be a national chauvinist. And that's why we have hamiyatul qawmiyya, the fervor of nationalism or patriotism. And patriotism is one step away from hamiyatul jahiliyyah, which is patriotism, ignorant patriotism, which burns inside people and leads to violence. And that description is what's meant. إِذْ جَعَلَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ الْحَمِيَّةَ. Allah puts in their hearts al-hamiyya, this zeal, fervor, chauvinism, anger, violence, etc., which is one step after the other. It continues to grow. However, hamiyya al-jahiliyyah, فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ, but Allah descends His peace, His tranquility, ala rasulihi, on His messenger. So the quality of the Prophet ﷺ is the opposite of jahiliyyah, and jahiliyyah here means this patriotic fervor, which eventually leads to nationalism and chauvinism and all of those bad qualities, which ultimately leads to violence. And most women that are abused by tyrannical, chauvinistic men. And likewise, some men are sometimes, more rarely, are by tyrannical, chauvinistic, feministic women. Most racist attacks are built on this hamiyat al-jahiliyyah. But the opposite of that is فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ, but Allah descended tranquility on His messenger, وَعَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and upon those who believe. So to associate with shaitan is your choice. But a better choice would be to associate with the Prophet ﷺ and the believers who will feel the tranquility and know that that tranquility is far greater than the anger that overwhelms. And I'll go back to my wonderful young boys that used to kick, punch, and spit at me on a regular basis. Alhamdulillah, many of them I built wonderful relationships and have very good fond memories of them. But sometimes what I would do when they got into big fights or they'd hit or punch, I would try and direct them away from where they were, put them into a new environment, a new situation, maybe take them out of the fighting situation, and take them into the garden, take them into the cool, calm area, take them into my room, play games with them, take them to the park. And people would say, he's kind of rewarding bad behavior. But at the end of when they calm down, I would point out, how do you feel now? Isn't that better? And obviously this is a secular school and these are non-Muslim children. And so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to quote Quran and Hadith. However, in my heart, I'm basing it around this verse of Quran. This sakina is better. And if I can get them to recognize there's a different way of doing things, and that this peaceful feeling of sakina is something that we should strive for. And if we strive for and get it, it's much better than the hamiyya, the fervor, the fire, the violence of hamiyat al-jahiliyyah, this burning within ourselves. And when they get the opportunity to weigh these things up, it can help them to make choices, and us make choices that we know, if I can remove myself from this situation to a point where I'm calm, where I can sit on the grass, where I can sit calmly and look at the water. And I remember, perhaps this is maybe a little unorthodox, but there was somebody who asked for not a ruqya, like a wird, like a kind of a prayer to sort out something that was going on in their life. And I says, every time this happens to you, this shows how old this story is. I says, take your Walkman and go down to such and such a place and listen to Bruce Springsteen, The River. Sit on the grass and listen to Bruce Springsteen. And they were expecting me to give them some dhikr or some Quran or something to sort out their problem. And here's me, rather unorthodoxly, and proving that I'm not really a sheikh, telling them to go off and listen to Bruce Springsteen. The reason why was because they needed to feel something which was different to what they were feeling previously. And to take themselves, that gave them that sense of tranquility. And anybody that knows The River by Bruce Springsteen will know that it's a very beautiful and calm song, but also the story in there is very touching. And that particular person needed to reflect on that story. So it's not complete madness. And alhamdulillah, that worked for that person. And as a result, they were then calm enough to take the wird, for me to say, well, actually, this is a dua that's going to help you. And this, but they needed to be calm, because when they're too upset, you can't say such and such, say such and such. And the same with my kids. Sometimes I just had to take them out of the violent situation, get them calm, and then give them something. And if people thought that was rewarding bad behavior, then that's their problem. And alhamdulillah, I won over a lot of people because they could see that worked. Okay, so that's what the Quran describes as al-hamiyya, hamiyat al-jahiliyyah, or the burning of the burning of jahiliyyah. So there's some of the Quranic verses. Now, then it goes on to list a number of hadith, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which add to this knowledge, to teach us what it is. And the first one, it says, ليس الشديد بسرعة إنما الشديد الذي يملك نفسه عند الغضب. And the translation, again, jump from one to the other. A man, the fierce, he describes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the fierce is not the one who can wrestle. The fierce is the one who controls his self when angered. The fierce is the one who controls his self when angered. And that's, I'm not sure I would have used the word fierce in my translation. The reason why is because in the shadid, it means a strong one. And the commentators all say the meaning of a shadid is al-qawi. And there's other hadith about the shadid is not the one who can wrestle, but is the one who can control his anger. And there's lots of descriptions about the strong one being the one who can overcome people in a wrestling match. And wrestling is very different to boxing. Wrestling is an art. Well, I'm not. Maybe I should be a bit careful and not to disrespect our friends at box, but certainly wrestling is prophetic, and it's something to do with managing one's body to overcome the other person's power and to throw them, overwhelm them in a particular way. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on one occasion, somebody came to him and he says, "I will become Muslim if you can wrestle me." The Prophet, and this is a famous wrestler who'd never been overcome. The Prophet said, "Yeah, I'll wrestle you," and he overcomes it through his wrestling, and the person becomes Muslim. The wisdom behind this is, and what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is about, wrestling over not allowing somebody else to overcome you, overpower you, but rather you overpowering that person is the process of wrestling. However, the true wrestler is not the one that throws the person because he's a good knowing his technique. Actually, the real powerful one is the one that can wrestle within himself and overcome that anger within him. And that's what the first hadith mentions. The second, al-ghadbu yafsidu al-iman kama yafsidu sabiru al-asl. He says that he also said, he also said, anger spoils faith like aloe spoils honey. So aloe is a plant which is bitter in its natural form, and it's beneficial. And that's important. The word aloe is something which is useful for creams. It's good for the skin. It has many medicinal purposes, but its taste is the opposite of honey. So if you put this with honey, it spoils the quality of the honey. You don't mix it with honey. Honey should be honey, and aloe should be sabr. It should be sabr. These two things are very different, and that's important because the description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that it's like something bitter destroying honey. That is like anger destroying or spoiling your faith. Now, interestingly, this implies that anger doesn't necessarily need to be something which is harmful. That actually, the example that he's giving, the metaphor that's being used, is something which is beneficial. So it implies that anger is actually beneficial, or suggests that, and that's true. The anger is, but what it does to your faith is that it can spoil it. And what's meant by this is that anger that we're talking about, this hamiyat al-jahiliyyah, this burning passion, which just drives you And it's something which drives sectarianism, it drives fanaticism, it drives nationalism, it drives chauvinism, it drives individual egotism, it drives narcissism, it drives all of these things. That's what the hamiyah, that anger, is being referred to here. And we'll come to when the anger may have some benefits. So that's the second of the hadith. The third of the third hadith is, it remembers, ما غضب أحد قط إلا أشفع على جهنم. He said, no, he also said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no one has ever become angry except that he was on the brink of hell. Except that he was on the brink of hell. And those people that have been able to pull back from anger will know what that means, because whenever, on the rare occasions when I've become angry, it seems to be noted for many years later. I had a secretary who people would come and say, you know, Abdul Aziz, it's impossible for him to get angry. And she says, I heard him get angry. She can recall the date, you know, he got angry on such and such a. And I remember a friend of mine I used to work with in London. So the same thing happened. Says, no, Abdul Aziz is very calm. Says, you know, he got angry. It was in 1987, and she gave the date, the place, and it was noted that Abdul Aziz lost his temper. He lost his cool. And when he does lose his cool, and the very rare occasions that I do, it's usually noteworthy. Why am I saying that? Is because I know that the consequences of me going over that limit is that people will remember this for many years to come. And so I don't really want to go there. I don't really want to go over that cliff, because if I get there, it's going to be destructive. So when somebody gets angry, it says, "Ma ghadiba ahadun qat." Every time you get to that point, it says, "La illa ashfa ala jahannam." It's as if you're on the edge of the shafa of the Jahannam, on the edge of the pit of the Jahannam, on the precipice over the Jahannam, over the fire of hell, and you need to pull yourself back, because if you don't, you will fall into it and you will burn. That's what anger means. And alhamdulillah, among the strategies that I know I can use is I just get up and walk away. Alhamdulillah, I've been married, alhamdulillah, to Idris's mum for some years now, and she said I never raised my voice once at her. But one thing she's scared of is when I just get up and walk away, because she knows I'm angry. So if we're in a conversation and I get to that point where I'm at the precipice, I just say, I need to take a minute out, and I'll go for a walk. And she joked the other day, she says, yeah, and I know where you always end up. You always go down to the local mosque, which is like 10 minutes walk. But alhamdulillah, that's my strategy. And she's not right. Actually, I don't always go to the mosque. I go to the park sometimes. But being able to pull back is what this hadith is about. It says, if you can get to that point and pull back, then inshallah you'll be fine. But if you go over the edge, khalas, you will burn. And alhamdulillah, that's what the chapter is about, learning those strategies. And alhamdulillah, I've learned that strategy, that in my case, just get up and walk away and then come back. And usually by that time, I'm calm. And whoever made me angry is hopefully calm as well. And I saved myself from getting that reputation that 10 years' time somebody will point that date out. Anyway, wallahu alam. The next, moving on, trying to move on a bit quickly to try and cover that as much as I can. And we can come back in more detail if people feel it's a topic that's worth exploring further. He also said, a man once said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what is the fiercest thing in, there's a number of hadith, this next hadith, and I'll just give the gist of what somebody came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He came from the front. He says, give me, Awsini ya Rasulullah, give me advice. And his answer was, La taghdab. It's simple advice. Don't get angry. So he went away and he came back from another. He says, Awsini ya Rasul. He says, La taghdab. He came back a third time, La taghdab. And he kept, and the commentary on the hadith actually explains that he wasn't just teaching that particular person, because that person wasn't the purpose of this hadith. and his behavior in other hadith, and the commentators can identify who that person was. It was actually a lesson to the other people on how to deal with that particular person. And when he was saying don't become angry, he was giving advice to that person and is giving advice to us, but he was also telling people don't become angry. And it makes a lot of sense to me that I was once in a class with my own teacher, as Khalid mentioned, Habib Ahmed Mashur bin Tal Haddad, and there was a particular brother who had a digestion problem, and he used to belch all the way through Habib's class, and everybody was getting annoyed with him, and Habib didn't do anything. And then at the end of it, he turned to some of these people and he says, "You should never think ill of the children of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." That's all he said. You should never think ill of the Prophet. Or the implication was, and then they noted that the person who was belching rudely, or appeared to be rude, was from the family of Al-Habshi, from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so what the lesson was there was actually we need to be more patient. So the hadith about don't become angry wasn't simply to the person that was asking the question, but was to everybody. So that's the third or the last of those particular hadith, and there's a number of those. So I'm going to move on to the next point, which is ilaj al-ghadab, the curing for anger. And he says that you have two things to deal with anger, and perhaps I should also read the Arabic. It just makes more sense to me. عليك في صفة الغضب وظيفتان. A wazifa is a job description, is one of the meanings, a job. So your job description when it comes to anger, your role, your need, what you need to do with is two. They are twofold. So when he says you have to do two things to deal with anger, actually I think that the Arabic is more explicit and it doesn't quite come over. The first of them is breaking it by practice, is to break anger. And it goes on, by breaking it, I do not mean removing it, for its basis cannot be done away with, nor should it be. So what he's saying here is that anger is not the purpose of this chapter is not to never feel angry. And you should deal with anger. It's not about removing anger. And I'd like to quote Imam Shafi'i on this, and I hope I get it. من استغضب فلم يغضب فهو حمار ومن استرضى ولم يرضى فهو جبار. He says, whoever is pushed to the point of anger, or things happen which are wrath-worthy, anger-worthy, and he doesn't become angry, he is a donkey. فهو حمار ومن استرضى, and whoever is given something which should make him pleased and content, who is given all of these qualities, given all these things to make him content, فلم يرضى, but is not pleased, not content with all the things that he's been granted, فهو جبار. So the one is a himar, a donkey, the other one is jabbar is tyrant. So here it appears that Imam Ash-Shafi'i is praising anger. If you listen to this, if you don't get angry, you're a donkey. No, what he's doing is he's describing two parts. There's one part is this anger, which is natural. And actually, it's just part of who you are. If you don't have these qualities, you may as well be an animal. That if something is wrong, if you don't feel that anger in your heart, then what are you? So anger, it can't be removed. This is what he says in the Arabic. He says, فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَزَالْ أَصْلَهُ. The asl of anger, the origin of anger, the root of anger cannot be removed because it's part of the nature of a human being. However, what needs to be done is that it needs to be, the consequences of it need to be controlled. And all the things, the description, and again, going back to that hadith that I mentioned earlier about the anger is from shaitan, and the commentators on it talking about describing how the blood pressure and all, and these are all physiological elements of that thing entering into your heart. Dealing with the physiological elements of it is what is referred to here, and that's why when I say breathing is one of the strategies that I used to use with my children, and I use with myself, getting up and walking out, just breathing the fresh air. These are all strategies which is to do with the physiological consequences of that anger being placed in your heart. So the anger itself can never be removed, and actually shouldn't be removed, because if you don't have that ability to become angry, then you've got something taken away from you. And I know from my past, before that particular period, I used to work in America, where at a time where Ritalin, the chemical drug that is used to in effect dope kids out of ADHD. And as you can probably see, I'm quite critical of the use of Ritalin in many cases, in most cases actually. So a lot of the kids that I used to work with in America were just kind of, they were just became zombies, because the drugs that they were given took away this natural human element of anger. And very few kids, in my experience, and like I said, I've had 30 years of teaching experience, most of that with kids who've got difficulties. I've only come across a handful that needed chemical imbalances, which could be sorted out by chemical treatment, drugs. I would say less than 10 in all of those years. So why am I saying that? Is because most of the consequences of the anger can be dealt with other matters. And in the case of the actual anger itself, it's not something that we can remove, or indeed we should try to remove. And sometimes killing off all of the consequences kills off the origin, and the kids become complete vegetables, and they lose all ability to be creative, to feel, to relate, to learn, and so the misuse of drugs is wrong. And in the few occasions where it needs to be dealt with properly. Why am I putting that difference between? Is because that's what this is about. There's the anger, the origin of anger. That's what he says. فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَزُولُ أَصْلَهُ. The origin can't be removed, and indeed we wouldn't want to remove it. However, the consequences have to be dealt with, and that's what the process of this is talking about. Dealing with the consequences, dealing with the physiological elements, the blood pressure, the burning inside you, all of these kind of things need to be dealt with. And that's the first wazifa. And the second is controlling the anger whenever provoked by containing it. And this is facilitated by knowledge and practice. So training it, and then using the trained anger so that it's measured and can help you to function in your life. And I'll read it here from the second, just to go in a little bit further. From here, I'll concentrate on the English. The second is controlling anger whenever provoked by containing it. And this is facilitated by knowledge and practice. As for knowledge, it is for a person to know that there is no reason for his anger except his refusal to accept that things happen according to Allah's will and not his own, which is ignorant to the extreme. Now, that you might think, well, actually, if you understand, and that's why if we do complete the chapter on anger this week, then perhaps the thing that, if we do start a new topic next week, perhaps contentment will be the one that I'd like to look at, because they're clearly connected. If you're calm within yourself and you're content with this one particular point, which is that what Allah has planned. Yes, Idris? You don't want? It's all done? You want to play with something? Okay. Can you play quietly over with something? You want to go in the other room and play? No? Excuse me. You want to do a play? Okay, I'll see you in a minute. That's interesting, actually. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Idris. Is that I don't know if anyone noticed that, but the first thing he did, he went and touched I've got a mole on my neck. And one of his strategies, whenever he becomes anxious, is to look for the mole on my neck. And this goes back to a time in his life where there was just the two of us and his mother was very sick. And he used to regularly, whenever he got distressed, used to come and touch my neck, this particular mole, which he calls his button, the button. So he says, Daddy, can I come press the button? And this is related to what we're talking about here, is that his strategy is, he's learned that the strategy for dealing with all kinds of anxiety is to press his daddy's button. And if he knows that his daddy's button is there to be pressed, he can get out of whatever state of anxiety he's in. So that actually relates very well to this, in that anxiety is the thing that we need to work at so that we can drive our anxiety and drive our emotions to work in a positive way, so that we can drive that hamiyah, which we describe, that zeal, that fervor, into doing good. And there's times where I used to, one of the things I used to do with some of my kids back in the school there was, I'd say, you know, we're going to get visitors next week and our garden is looking really terrible. What can we do to make it better? And then my teachers go, but we're doing maths now. I said, no, I just need to. And then they go out, and you know, half the school would be cleaning the garden. Why? Because this is a strategy to direct them, their energy, so to speak, into something which is, and then they come back and they go back to, and I could see things were just kind of bubbling, and that's so redirecting. So the second thing is to control your anger and direct it in the right way. Tayyib. And one of the ways is of understanding this is to understand be content with Allah's will. I'll relate this to, because there was a question about domestic abuse in the first lesson and was touched on it again last week. I'm going to go back to that question about how do we deal with it, because the consequence of domestic abuse is not just physical, that you get a black eye, because black eye will heal. However, it's this hamiyah that burns within you, this anger that often burns within. And there's a couple of people who are going through exactly the same thing related to abuse. They've got out of the relationship, they've got out of the abusive situation, but they're still in a really, really bad place. And one of them, well, both the two people I'm thinking of, both of them, what they want to do is they want justice. They want their abuser to acknowledge the abuse. And in reality, that's not going to happen. What they need to deal with is that hamiyah that's growing, the anger that's growing inside. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is to accept that Allah has planned things in a particular way. Because what they keep doing is saying, if only he would do this, if only he didn't do that, if only I did this, if only. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Kalimatullah taftah li amr shaitan, that the word if only opens up the door to shaitan. Shaitan is the theme here. And that anger that they're burning inside them drives them to want justice. And it's true, we all want justice, but they ain't going to get it. And I just have to be honest with them. If they want peace, the tranquility that we've described, that sakina to descend upon them, they have to recognize that actually the state that they're in is planned. And Allah is in control of this. And Allah won't let them down. And maybe just leave what happened and say that was Allah's plan. And it's not, if only I did this, Allah, it wouldn't have happened. No, Allah planned it in this way. And that's why you should say, Qadarullah ma sha. Allah has planned it this way. Now I need to move forward and accept Allah's plan and move forward in a better way. And that acceptance is a key to dealing with your anger. And that's what this point that is being made. So there's two elements. One is fighting it by controlling it, and the second is directing it. Right, I'm going to move on to the strategies, and basically there are three strategies he mentions. وَعَمَّ الْعَمَلْ فَهُوَ أَنْ يَقُولُ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. So the first one is whenever you start to become angry, is to say, أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. I seek refuge in Allah from shaitan. I seek refuge in Allah. And this is the first strategy, is to say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. So when you're angry, number one, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Then it goes on, number two, if you don't become calm with that, jalasta in kana qa'iman. You sit down if you were standing, وَيَضْطَجَعْ إِنْ كَانَ قَاعِدًا. and you lie down if you were sitting. كذلك ورد في الخبر. And this is what's been mentioned in the narration. I've already talked about this, the importance of sitting on the ground as opposed to sitting on a chair. Although sitting on a chair is what's meant and understood by many scholars, I refer my explanation to Abdul al-Munawi, who was very specific about what this actually means. However, those that say, yeah, sitting on a chair is fine, is also good. Why? Because changing your physical position will help you to deal with your anger. Going back to strategies that I use, in my school, I used to have what we call the calm couch. So people could come in the class and they're doing their maths and they could just say, Miss, I need to go to the calm couch. Sir, I need to go to the calm couch. Mr. Ahmed, can I go to the calm couch? And I'll say, yes, take this timer to the calm couch. You have 5 minutes. And they'll take a sand timer and they'll sit on the calm couch for 5 minutes. When the timer is up, if they're not feeling better, they come back to me and say, can I have another 5 minutes? And they go back. And usually you know who's at it and who's not. Because usually just physically moving from the fight, that process of getting angry, to getting to the calm couch. And we created spots around the school, which were the calm zones. And that's what you need to find. You need to find your calm zone. And that's partly implied in this hadith about sitting down, lying down. You need to find that point of tranquility. And later, as you become more skillful in this, you can actually find the calm place in your mind. You don't actually physically have to sit down. So that's the second. And the third, وإن كان قاعدا كذلك ورد في الخبر كذلك ورد في فاختلف الحال. So change your state. يؤثر في التسكين. So moving about, changing the position you're in will lead to taskin, calmness. وإن لم يسكن فيتوضأ. And the third thing is, if you don't, then go and make wudu. قال عليه السلام صلاة والسلام, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إن الغضب من الشيطان, that indeed the anger من الشيطان is from shaitan. What does this mean? It originates from his whispering. One of the commentators on this say it originates from his whispering. It's from the fire, but shaitan whispers something. Almost all triggers for your anger are some thought that comes into your mind, which just blows it. Did he do that? Did I hear that? That's the whispering from shaitan, which is why strategy number one is that and here in the ghadab min shaitan, in the shaitan khulika min an-nar, because shaitan is created from fire. وإنما تطفئ النار بالماء. So therefore what you should do is put this fire out with water. How? Go and make wudu. فإذا غضب أحدكم فليتوضأ. And others have said actually what's meant by this word tawadda can be different levels. Some just go wash your face. Others it should be wudu, and other people they need to make a ghusl. You know, these are all the different levels. And again, that's a strategy that I used to use with my kids. Look, just go wash your face and come back and talk to me. Just go wash your face and come back and talk to me. I wouldn't say actually the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says do this, no. But that's in effect the prophetic message being used as a strategy for children who have very serious difficulties with their emotional intelligence, with their emotional being, and that leads to anger and hamiyya and violence, hamiyya to jahiliyyah. So these are three of the strategies that are used that are mentioned in the text. And as I said, my understanding is that these are not just that these are not the only three strategies, but they're kind of indicators to other strategies that are related to these. And where you find a wise strategy that works, then take it. And you know, people might say, well, didn't you get this from yoga? Yeah, some of the breathing strategies are from yoga, but they work. And if, as I said, if you want to reject those and only stick to the three in the book, that's fine by me. And finally, as I said, the book ends, or the chapter ends, with talking about the greatness of hilm, the value of hilm. And I'll finish with a couple of those hadith. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الرجل لا يدرك بالحلم درجة القائم والصائم وإنه لا يكتب جبارا عفوا وإنه لا يكتب جبارا وما يملك إلا أهل بيته عفوا. I think there's a mistake in my printing here, but anyway, I'll jump to the English. He also said, whoever contains his fury, despite having the ability to unleash it if he wanted, Allah will fill his heart with security and faith on the day of resurrection. So basically, if you have hilm, this is a quality, it's a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inshallah ta'ala, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant us that hilm. And with that, inshallah, I'm going to hand you back to Khalid and just seek your permission for half a minute while I just can hear a couple of things I need to do. And that shows this is live, so to speak. And I'll promise I'll be back in a couple of minutes. So hand that over to Khalid, inshallah. Idris? Afwa minkum.
Assalamualaikum, Shaykh.
Walaikum salam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, jazakum afwa minkum.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, I think it was a really detailed, profound lesson we learned today. I've never been to such a dars completely on the aspect of anger, whether it's through the state, the hal, psychology. So I think it's a beautiful lesson we learned today. Psychology, spirituality, mentally, everything that deals with anger. Thank you, Shaykh, for that. Allah preserve you. Right, Shaykh.
Jazakumullah khairan.
I have so many questions right now coming in, and I think like what you mentioned, that anger is something unique or something could be something disaster. A lot of people experience it due to certain circumstances in their life, whatever they experience. So there is a question I like to ask first before come more questions in dealing with deeper state. What is the difference then between anger and resentment? So does resentment come from anger or is developed, or how do you explain?
Okay, it's interesting because we have the structure of Imam Ghazali's book is that this chapter in Ihya is called Kitab al-Ghadab wal-Hasad. Ghadab wal-Hiqt, spite, anger and spite. And then the next chapter is on Hasad, envy. And the reason why is because Ghadab, anger, leads to spite and leads to envy and many other topics. And so you're asking about So as I said, that one leads to the other. So anger is the origin. So can you just repeat the question there, Afwan?
Yeah, I was just saying that a lot of the way how I observe it is that anger and resentment is correlated.
Oh,
Right?
resentment. Yeah.
Resentment
So
is
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So resentment is they are correlated, and resentment is like something that grows out of anger. So the shaitan whispers into your heart, you become angry about it, and then you resent, and that's the case that these victims of domestic abuse have got to deal with, because they have resentment towards their abuser, and it's understandable. But actually, the only way that they can move forward is getting that state of contentment with Allah's plan, and accept that actually certain things were not in my control, and I shouldn't keep saying, if only this happened, if only that happened, if only this, because they can't move forward. And one of the steps forward is to remove that anger. So it's almost like going backwards through the resentment back to the anger, dealing with a state of contentment that you need to have to be able to move forward with your life. So they're all interconnected, which is why choosing anger was actually a very good thing, I think, because on reflection, many other things will come from this, and they lead into a whole series of possible discussions. And I think we have really one lesson before Ramadan comes in, and I'm open to take any of those routes, inshallah.
I think it is important because, as I mentioned earlier, almost all of us have anger in a certain ways, and it affects how we see things in life, like what you said. The way how we think and what we see, if only, and so on. Inshallah, Idris. How are you, Idris?
Huh? You got my mom.
So, no, it's okay. Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing. And so there's this question that I received. And anyway, since like we have restricted movement because of the virus and all that, a lot of people coming forward, sharing with us about their issues. They are stranded with people who are abusive. There are those who are just newly about to divorce their process. So kind of struggle. But there's this question that someone sent to me that I think particularly need to be addressed also. Is like, my husband, he said, is someone who loves to zikir and salawat, love qasida. And the first 2 years I married him, he was fine. Things are not perfect, but it was fine. But after the third to fifth year, he began to realize that he has a lot of angst that coming up and that has been triggered. So she was trying to find what was the main cause of it till she had experienced mental exhaustion. And she was saying like, how come my husband, who is someone praying, like to Qiyamul, like all this that related to the Prophet Sallallahu, is in this state, and she knows that she has to go to uh, seek counseling and therapy, but she's not able to convince the husband to go with her in doing this. So she's seeking your advice. How does she go about in this sort of situation?
There's two elements to all of the kind of topics that we're talking about: anger, anxiety. There's the outward manifestation of what's going on inside the soul, so to speak, inside that person. And the word soul I use is kind of interchangeable with in discourse with the heart, with the mind, with this, depending on the spiritual context.
Yeah.
But these is, I like to think of it as being the emotional ability that you have, or the emotional intelligence that you have. And when that emotional ability is not functioning well, it can be because there's a deep-rooted cause. And sometimes it might be because you just haven't got the skills that are required to express that, to relate those emotions into the world. And some of that comes about as a result of actual inability as a as a condition, and that is one of, for example, among the children I've worked with a lot has been autistic children with autism, and autism. One of the condition which we call autistic spectrum disorder. One of the elements of autism is the inability to it affects the emotional understanding, the ability for somebody to see something from another person's perspective, and that's actually the root cause, so to speak, of a lot of the difficulties that the person may have. Now, there's different barriers to being able to express this. So there's sometimes the expression of that emotional situation, or the emotions themselves are damaged. They just can't have those. And you can either fix, in the case where it's something deep inside, it needs to be fixed, and the way to deal is often only through therapy. It is often only to get to grips with what's going on inside. Look at the actual cause. Sometimes it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's very, very obvious. And the therapy doesn't have to be, sitting on a couch, lying there with a guy with a pad. A lot of the therapeutic approaches that we had with my kids, they're not necessarily my therapies. I would bring people in. I had play therapists. And in my own case, I have a strong preference for Lego therapy, which is something I was trained in, and play therapy to a lesser extent. But these are all things to try and get to the root. Art therapy. These are all things to get to the roots of what was going on inside somebody. And there's nothing to be ashamed of for trying to get to the root of what this is. That's one way. And the other is to deal with the strategies. And that's what these books are doing. And that's what a lot of psychologists will do. That's what a lot of counselors will do. So this person the husband of this wife that is very, very concerned, then she needs to try and convince him to either to work on the strategies, which I think he's been doing. Because if you say he's doing lots of salawat and lots of dhikr and lots of things to try and deal with whatever's going on within him, he's got all the strategies. But in the end, there's something deep rooted which might need to be dealt with, taken out. And this could, that's what he maybe needs to, and she can help him through this. But so identifying the right therapist, so to speak, is also going to be important. Because if, for example, she says, let's go to counseling, let's go to a marriage counselor, he's probably going to say he doesn't need it. If she says, I think you've got some deep emotional problem, I think we need to go to a therapist, he might also not accept us. You need to think, what is the best way to approach him, and what are you offering him, so to speak? Because if you just put the wrong suggestion to him, you might end up just damaging. I'll give you an example. I may be waffling here. I'll give you maybe a practical example. There was a brother who, out of the blue, he just came to me and started talking to me about dreams that he had. Some real horrific nightmares. And I just mentioned to him that I think there's something really deep rooted, that these nightmares are an indication of something that your mind is trying to block out. And you need to find a way to get to those. And I recommended a particular therapy which was used for victims of abuse in Africa as part of the war in the Congo, the Republic of Congo. They ended up in it, and I was working with these kids, and a therapist had managed to really get some success with these kids. So I'm just mentioned, this is what I feel from what you're describing, and I think you should consider this. She went to the doctor. Alhamdulillah, lovely brother, somebody who deep in his Islam, did lots of dhikr and lots. But once he knew that there was something that could help him deal with this particular, and it was the right thing at the right time, he went to his doctor and says, have you ever heard of this particular therapy, which in this case was called deep interpersonal therapy, DIT. So he went and says, you ever heard of DIT? He says, no, but I can put you in touch with somebody that might. And eventually, alhamdulillah, he got this therapy. And, you know, he did all of the dhikr, he did all the Quran, he did all of that. He's a great, great guy, but he needed something. So it's thinking how to approach the husband and approaching him in the right way and putting something practical on the table is really, really important. And what's practical has got to be palatable. You know, you can't just say, I think we need to go to marriage counseling because this marriage ain't working, which is what most people do. And that's not gonna work. So she needs to be strategic. She needs to think it through, present it at the right time, get some advice, do a bit of research, and then talk to him. And if he's a man of dhikr, inshallah, his heart will be softened to it, inshallah. Often, apologies for such a long-winded answer.
I think it's appropriate here. I think it needs prioritization and the way how to go about. And I think a lot of people need to learn that, as you mentioned, we need to do research, we need to find the ways how to go about, and if it doesn't work, we have to find another way. And you know, I think you did actually a beautiful advice, knowledge for us to learn from your wisdom. Alhamdulillah, thank you, Shaykh. You were mentioning about someone had a horrific dreams, nightmare, and I have one question actually here. The wife was saying that they had argument and they've been married for like 5 years, and the anger escalate, maybe resentment and so on, and it becoming more intense. But the husband keeps saying, and the husband family, her-in-law, uh, is saying that there is a evil eye, there is a jinn involved, there is evil involved. So she's sort of confused. So even if they're saying that there is a spiritual disturbance, but nothing has been done. They made a lot of healers, so-called Muslim healers, and go back. They come back again. They go back. So she seems to be frustrated with these sort of issues. And I think her frustration is not more of. It's more of that she wants to engage in another way, but the husband refused. So is the family of the husband. So she is asking you for advice like, how sure are we that this is a spiritual disturbance and it's not psychology or mental? And how do we know to go about it?
Well, these things are the word spiritual disturbance, emotional disturbance, mental crisis, spiritual crisis. They're all really describing the same thing. But when people blame shaitan, they have some justification from the kind of text that I've just referred to. But I'm hoping that you'll see that what my understanding of these hadith is not that you use shaitan as your excuse for not doing the work. And what is usually the case in most people that come to me saying that they're possessed by a jinn or they've got the evil eye, it's usually an excuse for not dealing with a real issue. And I'll give you a story that's a personal story. When I was quite young, I was living in London, and anybody that knows London will know that there's a place called Harlesden, which is not the most, it's not the loveliest of places in London. It certainly wasn't at that time. And I was called out there by my Shaykh, Sheikh Mahmoud, who didn't drive, and alhamdulillah, he used to need my help a lot in different things. And so alhamdulillah, one day he says, look, I need you to help me with some. And I knew in his eyes there was something serious. So we went to this, and he says, on the way we're driving there, and he's saying, oh, there's some guy, he's got jinn, and his wife's possessed by jinn, and I've got to do some exorcism. So I remember saying to the kids, I'm just going ghost busting tonight. So I went ghost busting in Harlesden for 2 or 3 nights because his wife was possessed every night. And then one day I just pulled him aside and says, how long has this been going on? Because obviously the Shaykh is doing all his bit and I don't really interfere. But I just felt I needed to chat with this guy. He says, basically, since I took a second wife. Oh, you got 2 wives. So where's the other wife? Hey, they're in the same room. What? You got two wives living in one room, and you're blaming the jinn? Yeah, if anyone's blaming, he's the jinn. You know, he's the one that's causing them all the strife. And what people do, in my experience, is a lot of the time, rather than deal with what the real problem is, they blame the evil eye, they blame the jinn. My teacher and mentor, Dr. Mustafa Badawi, I once asked him about how many times he's experienced a disorder, and he's a psychiatrist. He's had 40 plus years of working in the field. And I asked him how many times, and most of that was in Saudi Arabia. So how many times have you actually felt somebody has been, he says, almost everybody comes saying their wife is possessed or husband is possessed. How many times? He says one. He's not sure, but he says he thinks one of them might have been jinn possession. In 40 years of most of it has been some kind of, there's some reason why this has happened. And so what I would say is that it's not likely. I'm not saying it's impossible. We know that, but look to what might be going on. And that is, for example, in the case of the guy in Harlesden, he was just I won't say the word, but he wasn't a nice man. And to take two wives in a flat in Harlesden and keep them in the same, you know, 2-bedroom flat, you're bound to damage this fragile person. And that's so whether it's I don't know if you call it psychological or abuse or this is not right. So what's probably happening in the relationship is not simply it's a jinn and therefore go to Shaykh so-and-so who'll give you a taweez or some kind of thing to hang around
Holy
your
water.
neck or holy water. That's not usually what's required. What's required is to look at what really is the problem. What really is the problem here? And just going from sheikh to sheikh to sheikh will probably not solve it. What you might need to do is to go to some kind of counseling, go to some kind of help, talk to people, and hopefully get to the root and not be scared, because there's nothing wrong with trying to solve the problem. And the problem usually is very, very simple. In the case of this one, is no matter how many times we blew over the water with Sheikh Mahmoud, it wasn't going to solve the problem. He needs to get a decent flat for both of his wives. And that was the simple answer. And inshallah, hopefully she can get to the grips with it. She needs to get in touch with the right people, not necessarily just some peer, some sheikh.
Thank you, Shaykh. I think a lot of people are having this sort of same situation. And I think your explanation, details explanation is really something that we learn a lot on how to go about it. Inshallah, this person will learn from you, inshallah. Another question is a similar sort of question, but I try to make it one, verifies it, and it's the same sort of question I felt. Turmoil in the family, which is common in some cases, but in some cases, unique cases or worst scenario is that the family members doesn't change over the years, and it get worse. You know how mentally affected if someone were to be in a volatile environment in the same house for years, maybe 20 years, 25 years. So the question is, if you can't get out of that situation to save or to preserve your sanity, because if that person is angry, everything will be destroyed or everything will be affected, and then the parents are affected, and so is the person itself will be affected. And of course, in many cases, those who cause this do not see that they had harbor hatred or the anger, resentment towards the people around them, right? Even their family, their mothers. So how this person are supposedly tactically plan or find a solution or a way out. They went to counseling, but she said that, oh no, it's not going to work, because in the end, the one that involved just give up and move away and doesn't want to attend, as usual, the same thing, don't want to attend continuously therapy or counseling. So the question is, many of them also like to know is how do we go about and how do we cut it out, because it'll affect them terribly mentally. Yeah.
I think people need to be not scared, and sometimes the only way out of a situation is to leave. And I know that might sound really negative, but it sounds like people have tried everything they possibly can, and it's sometimes, you know, you have to sometimes accept that if it's destroying you, that you should not be in that situation. People should not be in long-term abusive relationships. They should not be in long-term abuse. It's not good. They need to think of a way out. And if things can't be repaired within, then people, Sharia has means to end relationships or move relationships into a different way. Sometimes things can be dealt with very simply. Just give somebody a bit more space. Sometimes it can be dealt with in you know, somebody just needs a job, and by getting a job that gets them out of the house and gives them some dignity, etc., etc. Sometimes it's deeper than that, and they need some therapeutic work within them. Sometimes they need company. So, but in the end, if it gets to that point after 20 years that this is of an abusive situation, that the only way out of this is to leave that situation, then they should leave. And it's sad, but after trying everything, you know, divorce is said to be the most hated of permitted things. The reason why it's the most hated is because it comes at the end of all the other things, but it is in the end still permitted, and it's that last resort. So try everything, but in the end, people should not be scared. They should not be in a damaging a situation which damages them spiritually, physically, mentally, ongoing. They need to get a solution, and if they can't get a solution, they need to move on or move out.
Thank you, Shaykh. But this is a continuation question, sort of relating. Does this also apply to children who are still being mentally abused by their parents? Is it wrong if you are above 20 and you leave your parents to live on your own, since you are supposed to take care of them, but they are abusing you mentally? Yeah.
You have a duty to your excuse me. You have a duty to your parents, and here this duty needs to be balanced against your own rights, so to speak, as a human being and as a child. And if you need to weigh these different things up, and each situation is different, so I can't just give a simple fatwa to say you do this or you do that, because it needs to be based on those particular circumstances. And I'll give you one example of somebody who is quite mature with children of their own, and whose parents continued even in their old age to manipulate and abuse this adult. And he was asking, am I allowed to not visit them? And I said there might be times in this particular situation where you visit them rarely and you don't break your ties, you keep your ties with them, but you might need for some time just take a break from visiting them every day, to visit them every week for a period, not cutting off, because that would be haram, but in this particular case, I'm not saying it applies to everybody, in this particular case, with the intention of allowing yourself to build your strength up, to build the relationship with your wife and your children, because they were being damaged by this situation. With that intention, go there every week rather than every day, until you get to a point where you can invite them to your place. And when you're strong enough to do that, then you rebuild, and then you rebuild the relation, and it'll get knocked back again. So this is one of the examples that was required. And there isn't a simple answer, because you need to look at the circumstances of this individual person. But you have to find a solution where you can balance the duties that you have to your parents, which are immense, and the rights that you have as a child and as a human being to be able to grow and develop. And if in the end your parents are damaging you so much that you can't grow spiritually, then there's times where you need to perhaps limit not cut off as haram, but to limit the way that you interact, the types of interaction, the place of interaction, the timing of interaction, all of these kind of things need to be looked at. What's the best strategy to develop the relationship? So it's not a simple answer. It needs to look at the wider picture and try and get the balance right for that particular individual at that particular time, which might change later on. And Allah knows best.
Thank you, Shaykh. I think it's important to learn how we deal with it again, based on the circumstances and prioritizing the situation. Thank you, Shaykh. Next question, Shaykh, is about, you talk about strategies that helps to deal with a sudden or current situation which causes anger.
Yeah.
But is there a way for us to become a more calm person generally, so that we are not that easily triggered and we are much more calmer person?
Yeah, I think going back to how we started, you have ilm, knowledge, then you have amal, which is action, which leads to a hal, becomes a state. So when your knowledge leads you to strategies, which then you practice, you practice strategies which make you calm. So your hal, your state, becomes a calm person. So by practicing the strategies regularly, you naturally, and you start to become a calmer person. People, alhamdulillah, anger is not a big problem for me, as I've pointed out. Anybody that knows me will it takes a lot for me to become angry. And people often ask me, how do you get to that? Actually, what happens is that if you learn to regularly deal with situations calmly, then calmness comes into your life. And in my case as a teacher, what my hope was that by modeling calmness, you learn, the children, young people learn to have that calmness in their life, and then they yearn for that calmness. So people would in my school, they used to say, "Can I go to see Mr. Ahmed? Can I go to see Mr. Ahmed?" And the reason why they wanted to come and see Mr. Ahmed was because they felt calm. There's people that I remember. There was one lady. She used to drive 30 miles. She phoned me and says, do you happen to be in such and such a school at the end of the day? And says, "Yeah, I can finish up at this school." And she'd drive from her school to the school where she'd agreed to meet me. And she said, "Oh, just wanted to see and ask how you are." "I'm fine." And then she'd go. And I'm thinking, why did she drive all that way just for like 5 minutes of complete nonsense chat? It's just, and the reason was, later she explained to me, she says that when I become anxious and angry, and I need somebody to be calm, and by seeing you, I become calm. So what happens is that calmness then emanates from you until you can calm situations just by being there. And that's what you should be striving to. So it's about strategies. The strategies become part of who you are. So you become that strategy. You become the one that breathes. One of the things that made me laugh the other day was Idris, who you may have seen just running about. He was actually telling some of his toys off. He says, "You need to learn to breathe properly." And he's making all these dolls, and one of his models, Lego models. So he's learning that breathing is a so just learning to breathe properly will mean that you become somebody that breathes calmly, and inshallah strategies will lead to becoming your hal, your state. And so just keep working on that, and the rest will come. And eventually your hal, your state, becomes your maqam, your station, which becomes, maqam is from the word qama, to stand. So you become stand firm. So you are always calm. So people will come to you because they need to be calm. So how do they become calm? They come to you. And inshallah, may Allah grant us this maqam of hilm and calmness and sakina, inshallah ta'ala.
Thank you, Shaykh, for that beautiful advice and knowledge. You were mentioning earlier on about someone was angry and you listen to music, and you said that the reason is to make them calm first.
Yeah.
And then, so the question here is also, there's two questions, but I related it together because it's something off. I would say something that you will not expect it First question is, this lady, he said, my son, he is 16 years old. Whenever he's angry, I will let him listen to heavy metal. And when he cools down, I will hug him and I will talk to him nicely and advise him. So she said, how drastic it is. Like, how far can we go with this? And then another question that's correlated here is, what if someone insists their calm behavior, their calmness behavior, I don't know whether that's related to makam or not, but is related to negative behavior, such as having cigarette or sitting with negative people that make them calm, or maybe tend to forget everything, you know. So, what's your response to that? Both inquiry questions. Sorry.
Yeah. People react to different situations in different ways, and the wisdom in dealing with people who are in a state of anxiety is to not see the anxiety, but to see the person and to see what that person needs. There's a principle within psychology that's identified by a lady called Boxall, which is one of what we call the Boxall principles, which is that all behavior is communication. And that people behave in different ways because they're trying to communicate something to you. So what we need to do is to understand the communication of what a child or young person is going through. And you need to look at the person and not the outward manifestation of the anxiety or anger, and how that person is dealing with it. So if this young man is listening to heavy metal, that's what you need to kind of encourage, so to speak. It doesn't work with many people. The son might be quite unique, but it does work with some. I mean, I know other people, it'd be different kinds, but whatever works, you should understand he is an individual. And if that's what he needs to be able to get through this state, the reason why I mentioned Bruce Springsteen and the river was because this lady was actually suffering from a situation which Bruce Springsteen was addressing in the song. And it helps because it's a calming song, it's a good song, and it meets that particular need. It might be that I have another child who only listens to Little Princess, so her go-to song was from, but the skill, so to speak, that I have to apply is finding out what is it that this child or this young person needs. And alhamdulillah, the mother has understood the young person very well. And if it means going off and listen to heavy metal, then knock yourself out. Unless it's something which is haram, then you need to guide them away from that, and that leads into the second question about, is the only way to be calm, if the only way to become calm is haram, and the best example is marijuana calms a lot of people down, and I'm not condoning that because it's not permitted. What I'm saying is that calming is a need, and if medication is only thing that can get somebody calm, then it needs to be prescribed in the right way. And I gave an example I said I know less than 10 children in my 30 plus years of teaching who needed medication, but they did need medication. I gave you one example. One child at 12:30, if he didn't have his medication, he will tear the place to pieces. And you knew at 11:30, and one day the assistant that was responsible for his medication didn't give it to him, and he destroyed the classroom completely because of his. So in his case, he needed the medication. Now it might be that but that's very, very rare. So the guy that says, "Oh, I need a spliff, I need a bit of marijuana before I can deal with this," he's not doing, that's not a strategy that's legitimate within Islam, unless it is really the only possible. So that person that says, "Well, I'm only calm by going out and smoking and meeting my pals," and he's probably running away from something. And I know that from a lot of guys that I know, is that the way that they deal with their marriage problems is they go out with their mates, get drunk, or in the case of the Muslims, they go out and have a pizza and smoke, go to a shisha bar, and that's not dealing with the problem. It's so that person that's doing that needs to think, well, why? It's running away, not calming down. Usually, sometimes it might be, and sometimes, yeah, go out and have a cigarette if that's what you need. But usually, when it's a strategy that you do, oh, yeah, I need a cigarette, I need to go out for pizza, I need to go meet my pals. Usually, because you're running away, and there's a difference between running away from a problem and having a strategy to deal with the problem, and that's what is being confused in the second. The question, what's implied in the second question is behavior, and may Allah guide us, and we need to deal with it.
So I think we share in relating and make us understand about people who have to deal things appropriately and people who are trying to run away from the dealing in their issues. Okay, another question is about divorce. There's this person, she married, and then she only married this man for 1 month only, and then he divorced, and it was stated that her ex-husband do not even want to talk to her from the day that he decided to split, to divorce her, until today. And she said that she received a lot of messages in saying that he's having mental health issues. But she, on the other hand, we can understand how she feels, because you are in a marriage in 1 month only, and then things happen, and he do not want to tell her anything else, even when she was encouraging her to visit psychologists or counselor and everything. So the question is, how do I deal with this resentment or anger that I will live throughout my whole life now? And I do not want my happiness to be deprived just because of this marriage experience. Okay, what?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I think the sister has been tested, and this is a massive, massive tribulation that Allah has put her through, and this is an indication that Allah loves her, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Ashad an-nas bala'an al-amthal thumma al-amthal, al-anbiya thumma al-amthal thumma al-amthal." That the ones that are most tested are the prophets, and then those are the most like them, and that Allah only tests the people who He loves. So she's gone through this test, and it's not. It's an indication that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has got great things in store for her. However, she's not looking at this, she's looking at the eyes of the world, the worldly eyes of what happened. And she's resentful and angry, partly because of the status that she's now found herself in and how people look at her because of what happened. Whereas the reality is that Allah has tested in this, has blessed her with this tribulation, and inshallah will raise her rank and her status well beyond anybody that wants to criticize or have any negative feeling or attitude towards her. So what she needs to do is to try and remove the feelings and how people might be looking at her, because this is often one of the big things with divorcees. Is I know a lot of people in certain cultures, divorce is worse than death, and that a woman who's been divorced is like seen as something which is second class, which is damaged, and we need to change as a society. But the individuals that are suffering from this also need to know that their value and their worth is not by the person they married or the person that divorced them. Their value and their worth is in the fact that they have a relationship with their Lord, and their Lord took them out of this, and that there's no shame. There is no shame in being married for a month. And in some ways, Allah blessed her by taking her out of the marriage. And now what she needs to do is to rebuild herself and build her own happiness and her own life, and move forward. And those people who can help her with that, she should welcome them in her life. And those people that are bringing her down or think negative towards her, she should cut them out. And that's the harsh decision she needs to do to move forward now, is to basically trim her life so that she can only have the good, healthy things in her life and get rid of all the junk, get rid of the rubbish that's around her. And that might mean cutting off from half of the community and half of her friends and family. But don't worry, Allah will be with her. And inshallah, Allah will protect her and look after her.
Ameen.
And she will move forward. And she'll be given something which is better than she's lost.
Inshallah. Shaykh, this is our second last question. Tonight, so many questions, sorry. I think a lot of people going through a lot of things, and we pray that Allah bless you, Shaykh. Does it sound like a hypocrite or contradictory when one tries to suppress the feeling of anger but still complaining to others about it? How can we stop from doing so?
There's an element of, I think hypocrisy is a bit strong, but certainly when I said there's the asl of the anger, there's the origin of the anger which is in the heart, and that is what Imam Shafi'i says. If you don't have that, then you're a donkey. That is something that you can't get rid of. But the consequences of those, one of the consequences of those is you complain, and when you complain to people, then what you've actually done is you've put the status of those people higher than they should be. When you think that people can help you, and when you think that you need to talk to people, to complain to people, then actually the problem isn't the anger, but your relationship with people, because what you've done is you've raised people to a status where what they think about you and what they think about whatever made you angry really has some value. And that's actually damaging. What you need to do is get rid of that status that you've given them and start to realize that actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that counts in this. And that if I'm going to complain, I'll complain to him. And that's what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. He said, he complained, he put the situation to his Lord. And once you do that, you actually empower yourself in a very high. I remember there's a poem, I don't even know where it came from, and I only heard it once over the telephone when my mother was dying. Out of the blue, somebody who very rarely used to call me, one of my teachers, Shaykh Muhammad Adam, rahmatullah alayhi, he passed away this year. He told me, he says, let me tell you something. When you go to the toilet tonight, in the middle of the night, you should say this. حَطَأْتُ رِحَالِي بِبَابِ الْكَرِيمِ وَنَادَيْتُهُ فِي الظُّلَامِ الدُّجَاءِ فَقُلْتُ إِلَهِ أَقِلَّتْ أَثْرَتِي فَيَسِّرُ الْأُسْرَ لِي مَخْرَجًا. And I've never seen it written down. I only heard him say it once, but it ingrained inside me, which was that I placed my saddlebag at the door of the generous one. And this is this process of saying, Allah, I can't deal with this. Allah, this has really upset me. Allah, this is really difficult for me. Allah, this person has really hurt me inside and I don't know how to deal with it. Leaving it to him, حَطَأْتُ رِحَالِي بِبَابِ الْكَرِيمِ وَنَادَيْتُهُ فِي الظُّلَامِ الدُّجَاءِ. And I've complained to him in the dark of the night, أَقِلَّتْ أَثْرَتِي. I have no more strategies left to deal with this. فَيَسِّرُ الْأُسْرَ لِي مَخْرَجًا, to take me out of this difficult situation. That's how you deal with it, is to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and stop putting the importance, stop giving credit to people, because your relationship with them is damaging your relationship with your Lord by going to complain to people all the time. And it's also causing a lot of, this is how fitna starts in communities, is where people start, oh, did you hear about Khalid? You know what he did the other day? You know, Khalid, you know, what's that going to do if we talk like that? It's going to, it's only going to hurt people. And the worst thing, it'll damage me and Khalid. So just leave it. If Khalid done something, talk to Khalid and talk to Allah. These are the only two people that matter. And in the end, alhamdulillah, Khalid never upsets me, so I never need to complain to him. but you see that's what's happened here, is that too much power has been given to people, and that's damaging you, that individual.
Yeah. Thank you, Shaykh, for such an enlightening way of how to deal in such circumstances and what are the right things for us to do. Inshallah. This is the last question. I also verifies it because quite similar to other questions also. It's about office politics and also difficulty to deal with your colleague, because you work every day with the person, and sometimes you feel like giving up, or sometimes you have this thinking that maybe you're going to have anxiety or depression because dealing with this person, because you're going to meet him almost all the time, and you feel annoyed meeting that person. So what can a person do when in such a situation, encountering difficult colleagues and office politics? Because you're going to work, you cannot leave your work, right?
There's some things which can be done within you, and there's some things which are done within the relationship. So you need to work on both of those and have a kind of a plan of how you're going to deal with it. In terms of your own self, one of the ways is just to actually recognize that these people don't count. These people are not important. And one of the ways that, even at the last question, one of the if you look at some of the methodology of the people of dhikr, that it's not just saying the words, but actually using the dhikr to heal the self. And one example is the phrase, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except Allah. One of the ways to do this is actually to negate the importance of anything that has more importance than it should. So in the case of the other person, the last question is that I need to talk to somebody. I need to talk to this person to tell them all of these problems that I've got. Actually, you don't. La ilaha illallah. They're not that important. Allah's more important. And when you think about the people that, and I've worked with some really nasty people, and one of the ways that I deal with it is just to say La ilaha illallah. They have no place in my heart. Nothing belongs in my heart. Illallah. La ilaha illallah. There's nothing belongs there. Only Allah. And as I say that a few more times, they become insignificant. And I go to see them the next day and I smile. Why? Because I don't care. And that's one of my strategies in getting rid of people out of my heart, because they don't have any status, so they can do what they like. And it's connected to anger, because I don't get angry. People say, why do you get angry with so-and-so? They're not worth it. Why? La ilaha illallah. Another way of dealing with things is when you're very close to somebody, is to look at their good qualities. Only think about their good qualities and focus on, well, actually, you know, my secretary, she can't type. She can't spell. She can't do this. She's pretty useless at everything. This is a particular lady that I used to work with. And everybody says, how can you work with her? She's totally incompetent. Don't you ever get angry with her? And then I look at all the good qualities she has. And I think of all of the good qualities that she has. And I focus on those. And I'd have no problem working with her. And then the fact that she can't type doesn't become so big anymore. Why? Because I can help her. It's only typing. I can teach her to improve her typing. And her spelling, all I need to do is just make sure she uses a spell checker. So you start to get a bit of perspective by looking at the positives in a person. And then in terms of relationships, that's to do with you, how you deal with the bad relationship, with anger, with the resentment, with all the things that go. You deal with yourself. But then also between the two, sometimes you just actually need to talk to them to say, actually, this is really annoying. You know, this is out of order. You don't do this. You know, I don't like it when you say the following, or I don't like the fact that you always crack jokes about such and such. I don't like that. I don't like you to refer, for example, they used to deliver, they would never make racist jokes in front of me, but they would make sexist jokes about, and knowing that I can't really turn around into them and say, oh, you just insulted me. So I would just go to them quietly and say, look, I don't like you to say derogatory things about women. Even if it's just a joke, I don't find them funny and I don't think they're appropriate in the workplace. Please just don't. And that was how I had to deal with one particular. So some of it is getting rid of it out of your heart. The other is actually addressing them and dealing with the situation. Allah knows best. So this brother or sister needs to work on both, and hopefully they'll work a way out how to get a better working environment, inshallah.
Inshallah, Shaykh. Thank you very much, Shaykh. Come to the end of the Q&A. We pray that Allah bless you with good health and long life, so that we can continue to benefit from you. Inshallah, we're looking forward next week, right? Contentment.
Inshallah. Content, inshallah, if that's what we're looking at, inshallah.
Yes,
Tayyib.
contentment, inshallah. I
Okay,
think we
inshallah.
learned so much from you, and I think if we look back from the start of your teaching just now to the Q&A, there's so much for us to learn about ourselves also, about
So,
how we respond, how we react, do we deal with the nouns, and how do we deal with creation, and how our longing and our holding on is to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. For this, we say thank you, Shaykh, to you, and may Allah preserve your good health, and so that you can continue to the benefit whoever that Allah had sent to you. So before we end tonight's session, Shaykh, we ask you seek your dua, closing dua.
ربنا آتنا نفس آت نفسي تقواها فأنت أنت وزكيها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها. We ask Allah to purify our lower self, because He's the one who is the master of it, and He is the best that purifies. May Allah purify our nafs from all of the akhlaq of dhamima, all the bad qualities. Remove all of those bad qualities from our lower self, and enable us and ennoble us with all of the good qualities, the prophetic quality. Let's understand the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his character, and let that shine through us and give us tranquility in the love for that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, imitation of that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And may he unite us all around the love of that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and through the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet, the love of humanity. And may Allah raise humanity and raise all of humankind, lift the bala, this test and tribulations that the whole of humanity is facing, to give us a shifa wal afiyah wa tawfiq and goodness, and give us peace in our hearts, and save us and protect us and unite us and give us goodness. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم افتح لنا بالخير واختم لنا بالخير واجعل عواقب أمورنا بالخير بيدك الخير والعافية إنك على كل شيء قدير. دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحيتهم فيها سلام وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you very much, Shaykh. We see you again next week. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Assalamualaikum everyone. Please take note that inshallah we'll be having a continuous session this Tuesday with Imam Abdul on the Tafsir Yasin, Quran Yasin by Shaykh Ibrahim Yas, and Shaykh Aslam this coming Thursday. Besides that, I would like to announce you that if you can, we are looking for sponsorship to cater our online classes and also video production, to get wider audience and to improve the quality of the video to serve all of you around the world, inshallah. With this, I say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon you. May Allah bless all of us and make us safe. Amen. Good night.